I'm Ian Delamore, and this is Digital and Dirt. All right, welcome back, guys. My next guest, this is a little bit different. We normally kick off the season with a Lamar executive, but this woman is a great friend of mine and a family of Lamar. She hates mayonnaise and loves hot sauce. It's a good makeup there. She is a certified scuba diver. She rode horses her whole entire life, and she's had a handful of crazy animals, which we're going to ask her about. SVP GM of US Marketplace for Vistar Media, Lucy Markowitz. Good to see you, my friend.
Hello. Thank you for having me and down here in Baton Rouge.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy that this is my first time being here.
I know. I love this. So you and I have been friends. We've worked together for over 12 years now. And this morning, you're like a lot of our guests, you're staying right across the street, but it's the middle of the summer in Louisiana, and any New Yorker that would take a cab from the Marriott over here would basically get laughed at, or the Uber driver would probably say, hey, get out.
Well, at least thank you for saving my my hair. It would curl up in about 3 seconds being out there. So thank you for the pickup.
Yeah, without a doubt. Well, look, we're so happy to have you here. Like you said, it's crazy that you've never been here before, and we've kind of worked so closely together, which we'll dive deeper into. But most importantly, tell us about these crazy animals and their names.
Oh, yeah. So, well, there's been a lot of different ones. So obviously rode horses. So we have the conventional, the horses, cats, dogs. I will go the furthest end of the other spectrum, which is that I also might think my first chosen pet was a Madagascar hissing cockroach that I picked out from the pet store.
So what kind of pet store do you go to that has a hissing cockroach?
A lot of them, actually. You'd be very surprised. I'm surprised that none of your kids have brought one of these home. I'll have to have a chat with them later today.
Well, I'll tell you this. We have 5 chickens. One was attacked by a hawk, so that guy's gone.
R.I.P.
Chick is gone. R.I.P. to that one. We brought home this bearded dragon as you bring your gerbil home, and then a week later, next thing you go, we have an entire bearded dragon set up. We have that cat that's so infamous. So yeah, we're right there with you. So maybe one day my daughter will be on a podcast talking about obscure
we'll
animals.
talk.
Yeah, I love it. So let's dive into your journey. It's a unique journey. But you started off your career. Well, you went to the U.
Yes, I did.
Yeah. So great choice in college, but then right out of college, give our listeners a little bit more about the journey and how you started and where you are.
Yeah. So actually, when I was still in college, we, as everyone knows, we hit the financial crisis. So that was 2008. And then in 2009, I got a call in March, right before the summer was about to start, that I actually was being invited for an internship at Goldman Sachs in New York. So interned there kind of right after the crash and had the opportunity to kick off my career in New York, working in the financial industry, which I think was really opportunistic for me. I think at that point, while there was a lot of people that, had lost their jobs during this time, which is really unfortunate, I would say being young and cheap and hungry definitely put me in a good spot to be able to kick off my career, doing something that had, I would just say, like a lot of momentum behind it, and gave me a chance to kind of get like a real world view of what the working world was like in a very high stress, but also high impact environment. So I worked for Goldman for about 2.5 years, and then left for an opportunity to go to a startup called Dataminer. At the time, I was hired as their first salesperson in New York. And Dataminer was a company that was really predicated on the Twitter fire hose. So they were one of the earliest partners, have access to this real-time information. And this was 2012. So I think one of the things that sold me on it initially was sitting on the trading floor. I watched all these people scrolling on their phone, looking at Twitter, because all of that was blocked in the office. And one of the first things that broke, interesting enough, was actually the 2012 London Olympics. But prior to that, people would watch the Olympics on TV, and that's when they would find out what happened. And this was the first time that everything broke on Twitter. NBC really needed to rethink their whole entire process. And more information was breaking, things that were moving the market. And so this was my first time working for a startup. My clients were on the investment bank and hedge fund side. And then I had the opportunity to I was thinking about, I was in a sales role, but wanted to do something a little bit different and started just meeting with everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Included in the everyone was I was connected with Michael Provenzano, CEO of Vistar. Yep. And we met, I think it was like a total blizzard outside, which made it easy for me to sneak out of the office real quick. People didn't question why I was gone for so long. I think they just thought I got stuck somewhere. Right. And we met up at I think it was the Birch Coffee on 29th Street, and literally just talked. I brought my resume, printed it out. I don't even think he looked at it, and was kind of just talking to me about his view of the ability to revolutionize an industry, which even though I didn't know a ton about out of home and didn't know about the marketing world in depth, I think the idea to be a change maker was really interesting to me. And I thought, why don't I go work for this guy? He's had success in a past company that he started. Maybe I'll work there for 1 year and see what happens. Maybe I'll hit it big. And almost 12 years later, I'm still standing.
Yeah, we always say that. And that's a great podcast listen. We've actually had Michael on twice, but his journey, and he touched on it on the last podcast about that, right? This past season was kickoff, and it was all about the people for him. So what was it about him? Here you are. If I'm thinking as like your parents, and you're like, my daughter, she went to the U, she graduated, she works for this, Goldman Sachs, beautiful job, company's never going anywhere. And then you jump to a data company that's basically a startup. And then you leave that to go off on a blizzard to meet this guy. What was it about Michael that because it's a trust thing at this point, because you're taking a gamble on, how old is Vistar at this moment?
So it was about a year and a half, 2 years old from like inception.
Correct. Which is still super, super. So what was it about Michael that sold through the idea, or was it just the journey and the dream?
Yeah. Well, so I think it was a combination. I used to always say to Michael, you guys took a risk on me. And he would remind me that it was also a mutual risk at the end of the day. So I think for me, it was a couple of things. One, I really enjoyed the creativity of being at a startup, kind of being in charge of your own destiny versus doing a job that many people have done before. And change takes a long time, especially when you're in a very large organization. So I think the idea of working for someone that also kind of believed in like failing fast and wanting to change an industry, I think that was really interesting to me. Now, at the same time, I had to sell myself, knowing very little about ad tech, mostly just what I had kind of read. But the way I sort of sold myself into Michael was at the early days of Data Miner, the company has gone far away from when I first started there. But at the beginning, really, I was selling a product that no one knew existed and nobody wanted.
Yeah.
So I told Michael, I could do that for you.
Yeah.
I'm not sure he took that as a compliment, that I was essentially telling him that nobody wanted to buy what his company was selling. But I think that it was the reality of things, of when you are trying to bring change, which was more than just, automation. It was a new perspective on how a really traditional old school medium was being bought, that you needed to both convince buyers and sellers. I think that was something that Michael wanted, people that like weren't afraid of people saying no, and that were going to be like in it for sort of the fun of getting those wins. Yep. And not necessarily being bogged down. It probably also helped that I was 25 and I didn't quite know like what failure felt like.
Right. Yep.
You have less to lose at the time. And so I think my parents did remind me that I was not able to move home, and that
nice little precursor.
Yes, exactly. They were like, you need to pay your bills. But at the same time, I think they were encouraging me to sort of believe in myself. And if I felt like this was a good move, they would stand behind me.
Yeah. And I love that about, because there's so many things, and we're going to go deep into what makes Lucy, because you've always had this ability to tell your story. But going back to the point, like Vistar was established early on to automate an industry, quite frankly, at the time wasn't asking for anyone to automate. A lot of vendors were kind of like, hey, who are you? We don't need you. And the industry wasn't even there yet. looking for automation. The word programmatic didn't even exist in our universe. So that part had to have been a lot of fun. So going back to your point, like working for a large company, everything's kind of cookie cutter. So if you go in and it's like sales, it's like, oh, this is how we sell. This is kind of the blueprint. This is the process. And then there's little room, I guess, for storytelling, the cultural side of things. So knowing you personally now, like I would have jumped all over that all day and been like, this is phenomenal. Like, yes, I want to go tell, I'm going to go tell an industry that didn't ask for this. And a lot of people throwing up the middle finger, like, hey, who are you? Stay away and don't talk to my clients. But also you get to kind of set the path. So you're employee number 12. Yep. I always jokingly say you're actually like employee number 3. And really, if we're being honest here, probably employee 1 at sometimes in your mind.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So touch on that. So you've walked into a company, and I've told this story, so I'll kick it off with this. I met with Sean Riley, our CEO, asked me to fly up there. This was probably 13 years ago now. Asked me to fly up. Hey, check out this company, Vistar. You know, you've told me about programmatic as it exists in the digital universe. Fly up, see what this is about. We have a couple agencies asking for it. We won't go into detail and what
our beautiful office
your
looked
beautiful
like
office,
at the time,
which was shared with multiple other.
Did you get to meet Steve, our landlord, who would wear pajamas to work every day?
I saw some random guy walking around. I saw some people sleeping on a couch. I saw some.
They were not Vistar employees.
They were not
I just
Vistar.
want to clarify.
Yes, I think there was like a photo shoot happening at some point. But the short story is I walk into this. Michael comes out, shake his hand. You were probably somewhere scrambling around as well. And I walk into it. I'll never forget this, Lucy. I walk into the conference room and like the door like hit the table, and we had to like shimmy ourselves in, and it looked like it was like a catch-all room. And you could tell Michael at that point was kind of like, I don't know if he was embarrassed, because I don't think he gets embarrassed, but he was probably like, oh, this isn't going to go. He tells his story. I fly back home. I tell our executive team like, hey, we should jump all over this programmatic thing. But as it relates to that company, like they'll be around for maybe 6 more months. But let's go on this journey together. You coming in the other side of that, walk into this environment, and you have to, as a young 25-year-old woman, have to just be like, let's go. This is phenomenal.
Yeah.
So what was that like?
Well, I think that I sort of joke that my time at Goldman like taught me a bunch of valuable lessons. So I'm glad that I started there. I had amazing mentors and bosses, but I think the other piece about it was that I was given a lot of liberty to do a job, and a lot of trust was given to me, even at a company that was that large. Now, that being said, though, you're in a fast-paced environment. You know, you have to be able to handle a lot. You're handling stress, you're handling pressure. The expectations are really high. I think what I learned from that was that I then had those expectations of myself. So coming into Vistar, I sort of felt to a degree like that could be my superpower, which was to know that I would push myself. I didn't necessarily need to be just pushed by the person that was, that I was reporting into. And I think in that regard, I was lucky enough. Michael really trusted us. And I think that I've sort of felt that even in our earliest conversations, that he was going to trust for us to go out and do what we needed to do. But also he was realistic in knowing that you're probably not going to make the sale on your first, second, third try. So I think setting us up for success and sort of us all knowing what the goal was, but also what we were up against, I think that makes everyone be on the same page and feel like we're working towards something as a group to kind of get people to change their opinions and thoughts. And so it's funny, early on, we actually sort of positioned what we were offering in market to be an extension of location-based mobile.
Right.
And that was really how we sold it in, because we needed to figure out what is something that people will buy. We were using location data. We were using this idea of, people-based marketing, of where individuals are going is a really good indicator of almost a real world cookie. And we were able to parlay that into out of home, of these just being another screen that existed outside of the house. So once we sort of found a place where people could say yes, I would say that's when things kind of took off. I joke and I tell this story sometimes to people that first start out at Vistar or a bit more junior, that the first deal that I closed at Vistar Media was $14,000. And at the time I was dating someone that wanted to celebrate this monumental win, which to me was like extremely small and embarrassing, and sent flowers and balloons to the office, which I popped the balloons in the hallway.
I was about to say, this is not you.
And like pretended that this was like for something else, because I didn't want people to think that I was like celebrating, this huge win that was actually pretty small. But I mean, that was my first deal that I closed at Vistar. Following up on that, ironically, working with then a different telecom that now has been bought by T-Mobile, who, bought Vistar, became like the behemoth that then I would say the taste of that win and then wanting more of it was like, oh, this is what sales feels like. This is what it feels like to win, getting people convinced that what you have to offer is something that they want. And I think we all had that belief though in the start, which was this was actually meant to make an industry better, not just to change it. And I think to me, having something that was a differentiated product that didn't exist, also a real product that I could see, that I could watch how it worked, knowing we would continue building on that and building for what our customers wanted was a really exciting proposition.
Yeah. And I think that's what's interesting, right? Because you're selling something that's not only for the brand and the agency and this new idea and new methodology. And I'm thinking back to my first time I ever met you and the conversations we've had. It had to have been super challenging as well, because not only are you selling that campaign for the brand or the agency, but you're also selling the vendor the believability into it. And I'll tell you my first side story, my first sale programmatically, because at this time, Sean Riley had his pulse on everything. Like I've never texted and spoke on the cell more with Sean than the first few weeks, and John Miller as well, of programmatic, because internally there were a lot of people that were like, this is nonsense. What are we doing? There's a lot of agencies that had that. So our first sale ever was, I won't say the agency CEO name, but she's since moved on, but she had a GM campaign that we sold for $83,000. And I think our entire first year of programmatic revenue was like $100,000. And we celebrated that. Other people celebrated. And I was like, no, this isn't enough. So I guess the question is, you're selling both the story, the idea to the brand, the agency, but more importantly, you're also selling vendors to like believe in this, because at the end of the day, if you don't have enough, I say vendors, publishers, billboard companies, transit companies, place-based companies, then you don't have a product to go out and sell. So what was that like, having to push the other side of the shop to make sure that you're getting enough supply? And quite frankly, some of the big names like the Lamars, like the Clears, like the JC Deco's and Outfronts that believed in this as well.
Yeah. So I think when you think about even like our journey of knowing each other, while I've pretty much known you the entire time I've been at Vistar, Lamar didn't actually become part of the Vistar Marketplace until 2016. That was the year, big year. That was the year we got billboards. And prior to that, we were mostly selling place-based inventory. And I think that it was very chicken and egg, because to your point, if these larger companies, public companies are going to get into the programmatic space, they want to make sure that they're going to have something to show for it. Mm-hmm. And so, we needed to have this balance of how are we driving up the amount of revenue. And I think one of the things we started seeing on the agency side was more interest in wanting to buy this way.
Yep.
Because the idea of buying all of their channels the same way, being able to buy through a platform, to be able to add this service layer that their teams could really, apply data, apply agency-owned data, have measurement, was really important to them. And they knew that for out of home, it was still a bit fragmented, especially at that time, where you could maybe get data and measurement applied individually to each different format type. But the idea of doing it in a more universal way, I think that was one of the first things that buyers were like, this is kind of how we want to buy. And so part of the convincing was by us, but we actually needed for some of our partners that were buying at the time to like kind of give the okay to the vendors of telling them, or the media owners, this is how we are thinking about buying, and kind of getting them to say, like, we believe that this is some of the revenue projections, where it wasn't just Vistar. We were kind of standing alongside of some of these buyers across, I would say, a mix of out of home teams as well as programmatic and digital groups, because we really had like two sets of stakeholders. And I think at the time, even digital out of home, like sat within its own team within out of home. So I feel like part of it was having it not just come from us, but actually getting the buyers on the other side to talk to our potential partners, convincing them that this was going to be necessary in order to grow the partnership. And I think over time, one of the things we've seen is like this convergence of these teams at the agencies are starting to work together. And that was just an idea back then. Like I would say folks like Lamar, like you had to trust that if this is what your buyer is asking, like it's probably something we should do. But I would say at that point, it was actually not a transparent marketplace. We couldn't even say, we could show a logo slide.
I remember this,
but we couldn't tell you where you ran. We could tell you ran on a billboard, but we couldn't tell you ran with Lamar, which I think at that point too, transparency was such a big thing. And, you know, of course we launched a fully transparent market. I want to say it was like March 10th. So just 2020, just a few days before
Good
COVID.
timing.
So I think that email may have been buried in some people's inboxes, but I think since then it's been, you know, like that was one of the catalysts for growth, is really being able to have that transparency.
Yeah. And what you're talking about is massive in our space, right? You're meeting the demand, but you're also making sure that that demand isn't just short-lived. And that's what I've always loved about Vistar. It's kind of like, hey, if we're going to build something, it's not going to just be because this isn't the future in the way, because it is. And that's what I've always seen, is you and the team and others have always seen where the future is headed. So it's kind of like what you were thinking about, and Michael and others on the team 12 years ago. It's kind of like, hey guys, automation's going to be the biggest success. So I'm going to switch over to the cultural side, and I'm going to say this with that statement. As much as you have automation, as much as you streamline processes, I see a lot of companies and I hear a lot of people talking today really around like, hey, if we just automate things, we could run more efficiently and we can have less people and costs and the ROI. And one of the things that I'll quote Kevin Riley, our president and chairman, always said is he told myself and Ross Riley and a few others, he said, as you guys continue to adapt technology, as you continue to adapt automation, programmatic, future of AI, whatever's out there, it doesn't need to replace the people, because the people are the heartbeat of what we do within Lamar and our company. And that technology should only aid. Day one, working with you, I knew that you were going to be a star. So I'm going to brag about you for a moment. It's a very tough industry to be in. This is my 20th year with the company, and I feel every day I'm still trying to make a name for myself through the work that I do, the team that I create, the passion that we build. And as others have always said, you're standing on the backs of others. It's hard to stand out in this industry, but there's also not a lot of people that are like so passionate about like a billboard, a transit screen, an airport, and more than you. And watching you kind of not only help build out this marketplace and build out this demand and this excitement behind something, but you've really kind of carved yourself into it. We were just chatting offline about your time at Cannes, and it seemed like you were everywhere. You know, you were at your T-Mobile ad solution, you were at Brand Innovators, you were at Stagwell, you know, you were at Gary V's, and you've kind of become this iconic woman in the space. And there's a handful of people that I can with confidence say that about, that are those iconic women. When you see them on a webinar, when you see them walk on stage, you see a post, you stop what you're doing and you're like, this has validity. So I know that's a long-winded way of bragging about you, but what was it that helped build the culture at Vistar? Because I believe that you were one of the main people internally that also did that. What is it? Just your personality? I know you're like bubbly, full of fun, and just love everything that you do. But what's like the heartbeat of that?
Yeah. So, you know, it's like a tiny tornado in a lot of ways. As we all know, I'm limited in height, but not necessarily in voice and vocal ability. And so I think that part of it is like a little bit of shamelessness. I think being able to not be so worried about what everyone is thinking and try to go up to people, have a conversation, but not just based on nothing. I think that there's a lot of amazing people in this industry that, you know, they're not necessarily going to come up to me. They don't know who I am, where I think there's a lot of people that I will like fangirl about, but it's also, how are you going to create those connections with people? How are you going to follow up on that? So when I think about how I've gotten to where I am, a lot of it is the relationship building with clients, making sure that, to your point, you can't automate a relationship that you have. And, there's a lot that goes back and forth over email, but there's also a lot of time that you spend in person on the phone with people. And part of that is making sure that they know as much as, I could suck the air out of a room by talking. I also try and listen a lot too, and understand more about the people that I want to do business with, what their brand cares about, et cetera. And I think that builds trust of also knowing that I'm going to make sure that things get done. Now, to your point about culture, I think one, I'm surrounded by an executive team and obviously Michael, but also a lot of the people that I, started with at Vistar, or that kind of joined, especially in the beginning. That was sort of the foundation that, all of us had, which was this idea of, we're going to get stuff done. We're going to make sure that it doesn't matter what the job is, even if it would be considered something that's like, for someone more junior, like no job is beneath you.
I love that.
And so I think, that's really exemplified when I look at, the teams that now I have, I would say, the privilege to get to lead. I think those people embody so much of that. I would say all of the leaders at Vistar have, pardon my French. I don't know if we're allowed to curse on this.
You can curse on this podcast.
It is in our DNA, this concept of just getting shit done. Mm-hmm. And I think that means a lot, but it's also getting it done correctly, making sure that we are, tying a bow on it, getting people the information that they need, both internally as well as externally, explaining ourselves. But I also think we have a lot of fun, like maybe sometimes a little bit too much fun. We show up, we like to have a good time, but we also kind of, I would say it's that work hard, play hard way about things, but it's everyone shows up, from the most junior person on the team to the CEO to the CFO. Like everyone wants to be a part of these kind of moments. And, we've obviously had some really, great special events that we've had, but not all of them are necessarily ones that cost a ton of money,
right?
But they're the types of things that everyone's going to remember, and they're part of what kind of bonds everyone together.
But I think what you're alluding to is like authenticity. And, I have tons of stories of hanging out with your team. I will share Katie and Jillian and Brittany on the LA team, who I absolutely love. And they, like many others on your team, have done such an amazing job of like creating these experiences. Because look, at the end of the day, there's tons of products out there. There's tons of opportunities. But I think you said it best, like you work with people that you enjoy being around. And so I'll give a shout out to the West Coast team. And they reached out and they were like, hey, you're coming out to LA. Would you like to like partially fund this concert? And I'm like, absolutely. Like, sounds like a blast. So as we do in the ad space, it's all about like treating the agencies, brands, and vendors kind of coming together and having this special moment. So the short story is what I realized is I was headed to an Usher concert, which Usher was my jam because I'm that old. And here, Julian and I find ourselves amongst your team and 12 other clients are having the time of their lives as Usher roller skates onto the stage and takes his shirt off. And we realize we are literally like maybe one of 50 men in about 30,000 Intuit Stadium, just having the time of our lives. And I ran into a handful of these women in Cannes, and they were like, I still remember that moment. And so that authenticity that exists, the connections that you have with clients, and it's not like, hey, you bought me courtside tickets, because you guys are never just buying things and letting your clients go off. It's truly like you're creating experiences, you're creating friendships. And that's what I've noticed about you, is not that you just like to party and have a great time, but it's really just about like creating those connections, and then it becomes more meaningful. And you act as like a consultative seller, where it's like, hey, I really enjoyed my time with Lucy, but also she's super sharp. Her team's super smart around data, out of home, digital, programmatic, the evolution into the future. Do you find your clients are more reaching out to you because of what you've paid for them to go do? Or is it more that authenticity of like, hey, that was fun, but let's dive deeper?
Yeah. I mean, when you think about just the idea of like what we have the opportunity to do in this industry with clients. I think number one, it makes it really fun, but it also, I think, is important to sort of pick and choose, and sort of these really special moments are, one, a great way to build these relationships. And two, it's a great way to celebrate big moments of kind of getting things over the line, because often, just as much as we're obviously advocating for programmatic, but not even just programmatic, but kind of getting out of home to have its day in the light, a lot of times so are our clients. And so getting some of these big campaigns over the line, like this is actually a celebration for them as well, because they've also had to put their necks on the line. Especially, I would say kind of where we're at now is like the pinnacle. We're hoping to, have this be sort of this inflection point going forward. But I think that I've had the opportunity for a lot of these people that, one, being in this industry for now quite some time, you have people that you started with that you now kind of see where they're at. Mm-hmm. Those people, we were all starting out kind of at the bottom, and you continue to grow over time. And those can be people that are your level, or people that were above you now that have grown into CMO positions, are CEOs of companies, et cetera. And I think, to me, I try and always pick up the phone. And if I can't answer a call, I will text someone and say, how can I help you? What do you need? I think that goes, one, it goes both ways. I think that you have to make sure that like there's a giving and a taking that happens. But I also think it's caring about people and work just as much as also caring about them as human beings too. Right. And that goes for both clients, but it also goes for your team. I think I am extremely lucky to get to work with people that I work with every day. I think, many of them are way better at what they do than if I were to do their job for them. And so I think, one of the things is to always hire people in a lot of ways that are better than you, yep. Or at least better at you than a lot of, the things that you find that you might maybe is not your superpower, but it's someone else's. And on the client side, it's also like to be gracious. I think people that are going out of their way, that are continuing to choose to work with you, one, because we believe that it's a great solution that is going to help them to run better campaigns than maybe what they were doing prior, that are like really thought out and strategic in nature. But at the same time, it's also making sure that it's not just about the work. And kind of going beyond that is what's going to have those like lasting relationships, go further.
Yeah. And they're taking a challenge, a lot of your clients, because maybe digital out of home is new to them, programmatic out of home or out of home in general. So the team taking the time, the thoughtfulness, coming up with creative concepts and ideas, backing it with data, that's really taking that chance, because on the other side of the fence, they have this really, really easy button that is buying Google, buying CTV, buying social. And you're like, hey, but this should be a part of that conversation. So I love that mentality. So kind of evolving a little bit more with that question, Lucy early days was like, let me go 1,000 miles an hour, sell as much as possible. You've now elevated into a extremely important role as SVP and GM of the US Marketplace, which you guys by far dominate the space on the tech side, but also the sales side. How have you seen your leadership style change? And as you've kind of grown into age, I'm not aging you. I'm just career-wise.
Well, I'm definitely older than when I started at Vistar. But I think a couple things. One is, I was given an opportunity to sort of throw myself into the ring of going from, a seller, one of the first sellers at Vistar, to then, hey, what if I tried to lead this team? Now that's taking over the sales team, which I'm also going from being people's peer to then being a manager and trying to figure out like, how do I balance the friendships that I have? Kind of who do I go to? Who are the people that I should be venting to? How do I also get people to want to believe in me, that I'm the person that is going to set them up for success and help them to like accomplish the things that are important for them, and not just look at it from like kind of that selfish mentality. Yep. So that I think that was the first thing, was kind of getting the sales team over that hump. And then over time, it's been thinking about like, how do you unify a group of folks that are working with clients? How do we make sure that the support teams are not viewed as just support, but as integral to the process? As I've kind of grown and had, client services and analytics and partnerships be a part of the team, it's making sure that like we're giving resources to all of those groups, making sure that actually we can balance where we need to optimize, and also making sure that I'm not in the weeds on everything anymore. Yeah. I think I have a hard time turning off a lot of the times, but I think that in the same respect, part of that is there's a lot of people that I've had to learn to really trust.
Yep.
And I do. And I think I'm so lucky to have the team that I have, both the people that are, directly report in and the managers that are within their team that I know like will get anything done. If I tell them, hey, I need help with this, like I am sure that they are the people to do it. A lot of these people would be like my first call in jail as well.
Right, yeah. Would Raj bail you out?
I don't know. He'd probably keep me in there for like a little bit longer just to have some peace. But eventually he would definitely get me out. Yeah, exactly. But I think a lot of it is just like learning to trust a bit more. And I think the other thing I would say is that having a framework and a process is super important, because I think if everyone can kind of follow, you don't just have like rogue warriors across. And I think that's the other thing that we've kind of had to learn over time is going from a company of 12 to over 300 people. You can't just have everyone operating roguely, because we need to make sure that people are like staying in their lane, are also being respectful to all the teams that work around them, and kind of figuring out how we have that appropriate handoff process, but where everyone kind of has their like time in the light.
Yeah. And it's beyond that, right? So the opposite side would be not rogue, but also just very structured. Hey, you guys all fit. Yes. And then that goes back to not to knock Goldman in your very early days, but that could have been the same mentality. So I love, and I wish I could name every one of your team members on the podcast, but every single one of them have a different personality. They have a different, what drives them and what's important. And it's beyond what I've seen holistically across your entire team. Is that it's beyond just like, hey, are you hitting your budget?
Oh yeah.
It's very personal. And you have a lot of people that are now aging and have kids, and what motivates them, and for them to still be a working mom and showing up, and a solo dad that wants to provide for his family. And it's interesting. So managing personalities has that become a learned thing for you as well?
Well, I think it's both managing personalities as much as it also is knowing that you're not trying to develop an army of Lucys. That would be frightening.
That would be frightening for everyone on earth.
Exactly.
I love you, but that would be
Oh, no. I would wish that on literally no one. But I think that part of it is you need different personalities. You also have to understand that there's different styles of doing things. If they work, have people go with it. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's making sure that the piece that is structured isn't overly structured, to your point, that you're just trying to get everyone to act the same way, because I think those different dynamics is part of what creates unique relationships in the market. I think the other thing too is you can't be everywhere. You need to not be a micromanager, but at the same time, you're also getting a lot of feedback from different teams, and it's making sure that we're balancing, ensuring that people have the resources that they need, the ability to have some flexibility in how they want to operate, but also knowing that like we still need to operate somewhat within a framework to still get stuff done. I think that also creating opportunity for people to grow within Vistar. And I think that those paths can both be not just a manager path, but it can also be as individual contributors, because I think that's super important, that we need to also celebrate people that are really good at their job, that can take on more, but that doesn't just mean that they have to manage a team.
Have you seen it inside our note? I've seen your people in the wild, and you could tell there's little pieces of Lucy, but they're out there in their own personalities.
Those could be things that I learned from them too, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And goes both ways for sure. And so have you had employees that were really, you mentioned the peer-to-peer and then becoming the manager, obviously that comes with some angst, but have you also seen employees that maybe were in certain positions where you've seen them and you're like, hey, let's move you over here and try this out? Have you seen those type of evolutions as well?
Yeah.
And how did you approach
I
that?
think there's a lot of people that are actually receptive to feedback when given the feedback in the right way.
Right.
Like we have people that are, a little rough around the edges, but at the same time, those might be people that I know that I can count on. And so it's refining some of those pieces that have helped them to continue moving forward in their career. I'd also say one of the things too, you talk about, and I know I mentioned it before, of kind of going from people's peer to then, moving up. I've also been really lucky to have people around me that they might have a lot more experience than me, but they see the value that I can bring and have actually kind of helped me to build confidence within myself that I can still offer a lot, even if it's not necessarily because I've had X number of years of experience. And so I think part of it is like people can prove themselves, whether they have 1 year of experience or 10 or 15 or 20. And so I think like my perception has changed as well. I think people's want to learn and grow are very different, and kind of giving people pointers of where they can, refine certain things can go a long way. But also I think I've tried to do more observing of some of those behaviors, of even things that work really well for some, but also some of those things might not work for other people. So it kind of goes back to like that same lesson with Michael of like fail fast.
Yep.
That can both be with a new product, but it can also be with like trying out a new tactic or something along those lines, whether it's in market or just like a managing style that may or may not work. Give it a try. If it doesn't work, abandon ship.
Yeah. And I love that. Managing up is big, and that takes a lot of like trust from your side, but also it takes that like believability that like, hey, your manager's like, hey, tell me more. The other thing that I kind of take away from that is it's kind of like a little micro lab, right? You're testing little small things and seeing how that works. But one of the biggest motivators that we've seen in the company is always, to your point, peer-to-peer, like giving that ability where you're like, hey, that was a very good job on how you handled XYZ. I want you, not me, the manager, not me, the SVP and GM, but I want you to go share that with your peers. And then you kind of watch that blossom or fail and how that's received. And maybe it becomes replicated. Maybe that becomes one of the ways and the staples.
Yeah. So it's balancing like humility and self-advocacy of sometimes people won't know exactly what you've done behind closed doors.
Yep.
You don't want to be the show off, but at the same time, like it's important that we celebrate those wins. It's not just telling everyone like what they did wrong or what they could do better. Like I feel really that it's important to make sure that we celebrate hard work. And to your point, that might not be because you closed the biggest deal, but it might be that you worked through a really challenging situation. You were able to win back a client. I think those are some of the things that it's not just about the mistakes and failures that, we're going to talk about and unravel, but it's also making sure that you celebrate those wins amongst the entire group that was a part of it.
So back half of the podcast here, last couple of 10 minutes or so, I really want to dive deeper into two scenarios. So to kind of manage time here. First, we're going to talk about breaking through as a woman in an industry that's been previously very male dominated. And then to wrap up the podcast, I really want you to kind of tell the story, how you're talking to brands fresh, coming off of Cannes, coming off of a handful of massive events where global brands exist. How are you selling through out of home? So first, in a very male dominated industry, how does someone, and I kind of bragged about you, so I'm not going to brag about you anymore on this, but how have you kind of become this, not because maybe it was a goal, but how have you become like one of the iconic women in this industry at such a young age? And what does that mean, not only for men, but also women in this space?
Well, thank you for that. I think one is both at my time, working in finance as well as actually, being at Vistar, there's been a lot of senior people that are women, whether they're my peer set, whether they're, on our C-suite. So I feel like to me, it's not as though it's just been, like a one size fits all. And I think that especially being driven, our C-suite, we have Janet, who's our CFO. But also outside of that, I think we have a bunch of males that I would say are like very pro whoever is the right fit for the job.
Yep.
And we see that throughout our entire company. I think that, there's a lot of diversity in a lot of different ways. I think also an aspect of it is, we'll call it, how are you going to get what you want? Part of that is not going to be just by brute force. And you also have to be realistic that like there are certain stereotypes that might be associated with acting a particular way. So I think that one of the things over the time of my career has also been like much more data driven about the things that I'm saying, so that like there really is no rebuttal, and trying to act as fearless as possible and put myself in the same rooms that I want to be in. And part of that is something that like I try and ignore the gender piece. And I feel like if you don't really make that something that is in the back of your mind, in a lot of ways, it doesn't really inhibit you. But it obviously does exist. And I think there's a lot of other great women overall in the marketing and ad tech world that advocate really hard for both like how brands are approaching, females and equality, and also female equity, which is obviously different than just the equality piece. And so I also look at what these women are doing in other places. And I think having it be more of a conversation as opposed to it being something that people are kind of like silently suffering or discussing. I would say I've been, again, fortunate to not necessarily be surrounded with that in my own company, but it's also helping people that are in, other companies and kind of talking through some of the scenarios that they might be in and trying to work through it.
Yeah, it's super powerful because I love that. Because having two daughters myself, you don't want that to be a number, right? Like, oh, well, Lucy got this because of X. But so it's almost just becomes the way that I look at it. And our producer Faith, I know, has reached out to you a good bit of constantly like taking these 5-minute calls, but also just women from afar that maybe aren't talking with you, and even males looking up to the Michaels of the world, looking up to the Christians of the world that kind of help flourish. Oftentimes there's not much that needs to be done other than Lucy just being Lucy and saying, hey, I've got where I've gotten because of my work, my passion. And also you can have this way as well. And if you're in a company and in a situation where it's not fostered this way, then find another company, because there's plenty out there that are embracing this. And so with that, does it give you a bit of pressure that people are now reaching out to you and saying like, hey, how did you get here?
Honestly, I love it. I think, it's funny. This summer is the first summer our team has an intern. Obviously, I've worked a lot with Faith and, sharing some of my advice and thoughts, but also I think it goes both directions. Like, I think I've had the opportunity of some of the people that I work on a mentorship level with come to me with really great questions and things that are thought provoking. I think it also flexes like a different muscle to a degree of what are the things that I wish someone had told me that I kind of had to figure out on my own, potentially fumbling through and could have done better. So I feel like a lot of it is trying to also give people real information, not just like what would be the nice like boilerplate response to something. And sometimes those are hot takes. Like, I think that's the other thing as well, of just sort of saying it how I feel to be true. But I do think it's really important to make time for others. I think, I joke around with, especially anyone that starts, my calendar looks like a war zone, but I say, I'll always figure out a way to make time. So I think that's important too, to make that time. I think what goes around comes around. Yeah. And I feel like a lot of people did that for me. And to be honest, still do that for me. Because I want to believe this is just kind of the start. So I feel like I got to pay it forward.
Yeah. And, each one teach one type mentality, those people eventually, and we've kind of both gotten to our career, to your point, like where we started at the bottom and you've kind of worked your way up, and you need to reach down and build the next generation of people. So there's also this prideful notch where you're also like, hey, I helped that person come along. But then more importantly, it's for the better good of the future and the generation of just how people interact in our industry, how they behave. The diversification of thought and mindset is kind of the big thing for me. Like, we've evolved, not just you and me, but this industry as a whole has significantly evolved the way that we're perceived and looked at. And trust me, I've been here long enough where I've heard some of the stories. It's like, why are you trying to make an industry that's so simple? It's a dot on the map. But now it's flipped it just on its head. And it's really now about like, hey, how does a consumer move throughout their journey? How are they interacted with different screens? So with that, the last couple of minutes here, because I know we could talk a whole podcast about this, but how do you approach, you have your tried and true folks that we work with. We love all of our out-of-home specialists, a lot of the agencies, but let's focus specifically on newer digital agencies, newer brands that you, the team, go in. How are you telling this story? Because this is really a curious topic for a lot of the publishers on the out-of-home space. So we're trusting Lucy, we're trusting the entire team on going out and representing. And I always say, you're telling Lamar's 128-year-old story. How are you, as an out-of-home industry, how are you going in and the team going in talking about out-of-home specifically today?
Yeah, well, I think the first piece is almost like putting myself in the shoes that I was at when I first started at Vistar, which was you kind of take the rest of the industry away, but we think about our own consumer behaviors. There's not a lot of ads that I necessarily remember that are on my phone or even on my computer. I think that thinking about some of the things that are most memorable or iconic, they actually are outdoor. But I think that often those are thought of as, moments or like a singular moment, as opposed to being a part of a bigger story. And so I think that one of the things that we do is kind of obviously talk about like what even is out of home and how much of this industry is actually being digitized. And what does this mean? What are the capabilities that then you can bring forward? So whether that's being able to apply data, and I think a lot of it too is saying, what do you do online? And I guess I would almost flip that. And instead of saying, it's actually asking. I think a lot of it is getting a better idea of what these brands are actually doing so that we're not coming in with any preconceived notions. Like that's super important to what does your brand care about? What are the budgets that you have? What are the assets that you have? What is the most important KPI? And then kind of then put together a story that fits the things that they're asking, as opposed to it being something that's super generic. So maybe it's they have really cool creative that they're trying to enhance. So we can talk about maybe they want to leverage our creative studio to turn those into something that's a bit more animated or 3D. Maybe it's that it's a pharma brand. They care all about showing script lift. And we can say, oh, no problem. We can work with Crossix or IQVIA. Maybe it's, an agency wants to use their owned data. Maybe it is about, now that we're kind of part of the T-Mobile family, that they're interested in understanding some of the on-device behaviors for different streaming apps or things along those lines, where we can help them to reach these people in the physical world. And I think that as we show, one of the benefits we have now at this point is we have so many examples of great brands that have effectively like checked everything off the checklist. Cause I think that's the other thing too, is you can have a great strategy, but if you have bad creative, it's not going to necessarily like bring the story to life. So I think that the other thing that we've tried to do is not be complacent, which is if someone sends us something, and whether it's a strategy or it's creative, we might say, we actually don't think this is a great idea. Or someone will say to us, I only have X budget. Let's just do a study anyway. And we'll say, I don't think you should, because the results are not going to look good. And we would really recommend like something else and giving them some of those suggestions. So I think it's really going with that consultative behavior, but again, like really understanding what the brand is looking to accomplish. Cause I think that is the biggest mistake. I don't even think it's just in out of home. I think it's in everything that if you don't ask a client what they're doing, you might assume things. I think a good example was we had a meeting recently with the CMO of the WNBA, and the budgets that the WNBA has are a tiny fraction of what the NBA does. Without asking more about, how they're approaching the market and what they care about, we potentially could give them a suggestion that would be like very tone deaf or completely off base. Same thing in who their target is. Like their target audience is anyone that loves sports. Right. You easily could walk into that meeting and say, how do we help you target women, which would also like meeting over.
Yep.
So I think it's just also making sure that you ask those questions and then be able to kind of build in a meeting. And also I would just say like the visual representation of a lot of the inventory goes a long way, because at the end of the day, this is physical real estate. And I think that especially in a time when like brand safety is more important than ever, and knowing the environment that you're going to be in, I would say like people have been very receptive to out of home.
Yeah. And that's super powerful. We talk about sound bites all the time, like bottle that up, because I think as I think about the WNBA, and I was at the Brand Innovators and heard the CMO of the WNBA, and I was blown away by what they focus on. And someone could have easily just went into that meeting and said like, oh, we'll just replicate what we did with the NBA. It's super cool. Dynamic content, live scores. Like that's what you would want. But the reality of it is what they want is they want to grow viewership, but more importantly, grow passion about the characters that exist, the Caitlin Clarks, the Angel Reeses of the world, and so much beyond. So I think that that's a powerful statement, and understanding and not just going in there and just selling that product and just doing a pitch and be like, crush that pitch, and then not understand why the client never called back, but truly taking a moment, taking a beat and diving deep into it, I think is powerful. Because,
and ask too, like if well, maybe not if you don't get a call back, because it's hard to ask on silence on the other side. But if someone does say, we're not going to move forward, I think that's something that our team is phenomenal at, which is even if someone says no, asking for a bit more information to understand why they didn't move forward, if there's anything that we could have presented differently, and learning from that. And that's something that we also like bring back. Just as much of the wins is also talking about some of these losses and what happened and how we can learn from them and hopefully do better in the future.
Yeah. And we know the difference between, we won't call that the other digital media, but we know the moment that a board goes up on a roadside billboard, a urban panel that goes up, and those brands and the agencies that purchase that through your team and the platform, they're like, whoa, it's significantly different. And the impact that it has is way different than, hey, that campaign, the KPIs of that digital social campaign, or that Google search campaign, or that AI campaign. You're kind of like, it doesn't have the buzz and the excitement that a digital out of home campaign has.
Totally. And I think, both there's at the brand and then also at the agencies, like that convergence of people talking about these mediums not standing separately and how they all work together to drive results, I think is encouraging better collaboration.
Agreed.
And I think we've come a long way. And I think that we're going to continue down that path, because that is how like brands aren't thinking about these in silos. And I think even programmatic, it is not a channel. It's a way of activating. It's a method. And I think that mentality, even for other channels, like has changed a lot. And I think it's allowing for the perception of what is programmatic out of home. It's just a way to buy out of home. It's not something completely different. And I feel like that is starting to resonate more and more with both the buyers as well as the publisher community. Yeah.
And I'm so glad you said that, because that's the thing that I've battled internally for quite some time, but it's now kind of, you're like, yeah, it's just a way of buying. But I would agree with you. I think the other thing that it's really done is it's knocked down, whether we realize it or not, but it's knocked down the walls within agencies of even the way they buy traditional out of home. Is it's thoughtful on, why do I include a Twitter campaign? Why do I add a QR component into the activation? Why do I make that 3D portion match with my TikTok ad that I have? Why do I have that social influencer?
We don't spend separate time doing each one of these things. The number of times that you're walking down the street on your phone, or you're watching TV and you're on your computer and you're also on your phone at the same time, like it's pretty wild just how we interact with ads around us in all of these different environments. And so the idea of saying that they are separate and that they are not intertwined is crazy.
Yeah. I think about my kids all the time, the way they consume media, and it is fun to watch. And I always call it that aha moment when I'll use my kids, for example, when they see something on Roblox and then they see it on TikTok and then they see it on a billboard. They're like, Dad, did you see that Mr. Beast did this? And then I saw his billboard on the TikTok. And then also they had this fake world that was built out with little mini billboards within the Roblox game. And you're like, yes, we're not in silos anymore.
All coming together.
I love it. Look, I could talk to you for hours. I appreciate our friendship. I love our friendship, but most importantly, how you're helping pave the industry along with a lot of amazing other people. I'm glad Michael took a chance on you. More importantly, you took a chance on yourself. I love that you've become this iconic figure in this space. And I think it's just really your presence and who you are in this space. And I know it's a massive team behind you that's a part of that as well. But last question, certified scuba diver, favorite place you've dove, and what's your kind of like dream place to dive?
Yeah. So growing up, I got certified for scuba diving because my best friend at the time was her whole family. They were huge divers. So I would go with them on vacation to the Cayman Islands. And I would say that that's still probably one of my favorite places to dive, also just because I feel like it's synonymous with like some of the most fun vacations. But I would love at some point to go whale shark diving in the Philippines.
Oof. Hard pass on that. But it shows who you are.
They're big and friendly.
Yeah, I bet.
Don't watch that new shark documentary. It might scare you a little bit.
Yeah, it's like timed out Shark Week and then you go on that vacation.
Exactly.
Well, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much, my friend.
Thanks so much for having me, Ian.
All right. Thanks for listening to this episode of Digital and Dirt. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Follow us on social media for the latest updates and stay tuned for our next episode.